Class is now in session. I'm Professor Rocky, and today we'll be discussing Game 17 of the regular season, in which the Sharks have lost 6-2 to the Minnesota Wild. And this score obviously looks quite bad, but it actually feels a lot similar to the game that the Sharks played against the Los Angeles Kings a few games ago, in which they also happened to lose 6-2. This was not necessarily a horribly played game by the San Jose Sharks. In fact, they had significantly more high-danger scoring chances than the Minnesota Wild had. What really was the difference here in this game? Well, I guess we'll get to that a bit later, but first we'll start off with how this game started, and it was quite positive for the Sharks. Brent Burns getting the first one of the game, and it was another beauty highlight reel goal. Just so happened to be against the Minnesota Wild again to put the Sharks up 1-0 just a minute into this game. However, the Wild would get a quick couple of responses from Zuccarello, and then just a few seconds later, Kaprizov to make it 2-1 Wild, and that would be the score at the end of the first period. The Wild would then get two more in the second, coming from both Cole as well as Marcus Foligno, and that would see the end of the night for Martin Jones. After just a couple minutes after the Sharks end up changing goaltenders, they get one back from Logan Couture, and maybe it seemed like a comeback would start until the Wild are to make it 5-2 with a goal from Brodin, and that would be the score at the end of the second period. And in the third period, if you were expecting a massive Sharks push, maybe you would have been slightly disappointed. The Sharks did get a couple of nice chances, but nothing really sustained, and they end up losing it 6-2 with the empty netter added by Victor Rask to the Minnesota Wild. And normally I would have four things to talk about, but I'm going to spend a lot of time here on this first point, which is Jones and Dubnyk, wrapping back around to the point that I had tried to make earlier, what the difference was in this game between the Sharks and the Wild. It was absolutely the goaltending. So Jones ended up getting the start in this one, and he had put together a nice little string of games where he played well. That good game against the St. Louis Blues, against the Ducks, against the Golden Knights. So he ends up getting the start here tonight, and the first couple of goals of this game from Zuccarello and Kaprizov, I really can't put any blame on him. This Kaprizov one was off of a tic-tac-toe kind of play from the Wild, more or less an impossible shot to stop. The Zuccarello one was a bit more able, I guess you could say, to stop it, but it was also kind of a play where Jones is likely respecting the backdoor play that Zuccarello can go for, that he actually ended up going for on the second goal just a few seconds later, and so I don't necessarily blame him all that much for that one. However, that brings us to goal 3 and of course goal 4. So this was a cross-ice pass to Ian Cole for this third goal of the game, but Ian Cole takes a moment to settle this puck and skate with it a bit more, so Martin Jones had more than enough time to get across and get himself settled for this shot, and yet he lets it in to make it 3-1 Wild. And in the fourth goal, just a complete disaster. There have been many goals this season for Martin Jones where I have said, well, this is not necessarily an easy save, but it's one that you hope he can make. This is, for all intents and purposes, a very easy save, and one that a goaltender should be able to make every single time. I mean, you take a look at so many pre-game routines from goaltenders, and they're frequently trying to test their hand-eye coordination. I mean, I've seen videos of goaltenders like Braden Holtby a few years ago, where they'll throw a tennis ball off of the wall that they're standing very close to and immediately try to catch it with their other hand. It's a very, very simple sort of test to try and keep your hand-eye coordination skills in line. And yet, this puck off of the shot from Marcus Foligno deflects off of the stick of, I believe, Milosh or Clayson, or one of those two players, and then it just begins floating through the air rather slowly, at least for an NHL game, and Martin Jones just seemingly struggles to track this puck with his glove hand, and it ends up just floating over his shoulder and into the back of the net. And this ends up being the last goal he lets in this game before getting pulled for Devan Dubnyk, and as I said, just an inexcusable goal. And you take a look at the other side of the ice, you have Kähkönen for Kaapo Kähkönen for the Minnesota Wild in nets. He's let in this one goal to Brent Burns, but that was an insane goal, as I said. But up to that point, he had let in nothing else. He had made multiple great saves. And so if you're the forwards for the San Jose Sharks and you're really pushing, you're getting some great chances, but the other team's goaltender is just being a brick wall here tonight. And then you turn around and you look in your defensive zone and you see Martin Jones have a puck flutter over his shoulder as he sort of struggles to even get his glove hand in line with it. And you get very, very demoralized. I mean, me just as a fan seeing goals 4 and goals 5, which I will get to a bit later, go in, I'm already kind of taken out of the game a bit. So imagine actually having to play that game and seeing your goaltender do that after you've already laid on chance after chance against the Minnesota Wild. It is very sad. And so after I said that Jones ends up getting pulled after this goal, the Sharks respond to this change of goaltenders by scoring a goal from themselves. Logan Couture, they get some pressure going, and even though they end up taking a 4-minute penalty for the double sticking high double minor on the high sticking double minor from Nikolai Nizov, they actually end up getting some shorthanded chances on this 4-minute penalty, a chance to potentially even make it 4-3. But then in the dying seconds of this power play that the Sharks probably ended up with more momentum from than the Minnesota Wild did, we see another one of these types of floaterish style shots from Jonas Brodin, and it just glances off the top of Devan Dubnyk's glove and goes to the back of the net. Not as embarrassing as the goal let in by Martin Jones, but still not one that you want to see your goaltender let in, and one Devan Dubnyk should have absolutely made the save on. So again, you just scored this goal, you brought it to within 2, you're responding, you've got a new goaltender in net, it's a bit of a reset for the entire team, you're looking good, and then suddenly you let in a goal like that. I had said that the Sharks didn't come out with much of a response in the third period, but it's kind of hard to blame the forwards and defensemen for not sort of being able to get once again back up on the horse, back down 3 goals, because your goaltenders are sort of like unable to stop beach balls, it seemed like, on the glove side. So I can imagine that it was an extremely disappointing night, and it's also quite disappointing after you saw Jones put up 3 straight games to let in 3 straight good games, I should say, to let in a goal like that, and Devan Dubnyk not really that much better. You could say, well, Dubnyk only let in 1 goal in this game, but how much were the Wild really doing in the third period? He wasn't really challenged much more than like 1 very nice save in the third period, I would say. And so just in general, both goaltenders from the Sharks side completely outdueled by Kähkönen, who really showed the Sharks what they would love to get out of their goaltender. Kähkönen wasn't perfect tonight, obviously. He lets in these 2 goals, but these were 2 very tough ones, and otherwise he made multiple key saves on a lot of Sharks shots, and it's just not something that the Sharks have been getting from their goaltenders consistently enough, and I don't know if it's something that we can expect the Sharks to get from their goaltenders consistently enough. But finally, moving on to the next point, we'll talk about Ryan Donato. He was a player who had come over from this very same team that the Sharks just played against, the Minnesota Wild, and through the first few games of the season, he was seemingly the only San Jose Sharks who actually looked energized night in and night out. Even Logan Couture, who has had a very, very good season, at least at the start of the year, had a couple of games where he looked somewhat off, but Donato seemingly for those first 5, 6, 7 games was really into it. But it seems as though that shine has somewhat worn off in these past few games, and that's been kind of disappointing to see. Donato has been more or less somewhat invisible. He had 1 nice chance here tonight, but otherwise was kind of not so great. And I always was kind of weirded out by a bit of the deployment of Ryan Donato through this season thus far. It felt like he got a couple of good opportunities on the first line with Logan Couture and Kevin Labanc, and then immediately, like the game after it seemingly didn't work out for that 1 game, Donato was immediately put back onto the third line, and it felt as though Booner decided to try and abuse the fact that Donato was being an energizing force and trying to put him on the third line to get an energy style of third line instead of rewarding him for his good play and keeping him in the top 6, which I'm not sure if I really agree with, but in the end, it kind of doesn't work out. Maybe Donato also somewhat demoralized in this situation and just not really looking all that great in these past few games. Hopefully he can pick it up, and we know he can just from the first few games of the season, but it hasn't looked great as of late. And finally, we'll talk about Karlsson and Simek. Both of these players were said that they could be back for the game here tonight against the Minnesota Wild. It did not happen for either of them. However, Simek is apparently somewhat close to returning. It's possible that he ends up playing on Thursday. Karlsson a bit further off. His original prognosis was to be day to day, but now it has been moved to week, and so he likely won't play on Thursday. There's an outside chance that he plays on Saturday, but we may be waiting a few more games before Erik Karlsson returns to the lineup, which I guess maybe is a good thing, as it's kind of a bad idea, as we've seen many times in the past with Erik Karlsson, to try and rush him back to the lineup when he's dealing with an injury. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Thursday as they will host the Vegas Golden Knights, their second game against the Knights this season. And if they thought this game against the Minnesota Wild was difficult, well, then they're in for a bit of a surprise with the Golden Knights on Thursday. We'll see if they can get that first victory against that team this year. Class dismissed.